morning, and thank you so much for joining our presentation on the impacts of the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation, a webinar for elected officials. My name is Pete Christensen. I am co-director of Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. Clean Cities and Communities is a U.S. Department of Energy partnership to advance clean transportation nationwide. There are 75 Clean Cities and Communities coalitions around the country, with 11 of them being here in California. And we work with local communities to implement alternative fuels, electric vehicles, idle reduction technologies, efficiency improvements, new mobility choices, and emerging transportation technologies. Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition has been around for 30 years. We were established in 1994, and we cover Santa Clara, San Mateo, San Benito, Santa Cruz, and Monterey counties. And locally, we are hosted by Breathe California, the Bay Area, and have been for the last 16 years. And we form local partnerships with our stakeholders. We have well over 300 stakeholders in our 5-county territory. About half of them are from the private sector and half from the public sector, such as cities and counties and schools, etc. And we work with public and private fleets and product and service providers and environmental and energy agencies and other government agencies, and with nonprofits and advocacy organizations. And we build relationships with our local stakeholders, and we connect fleets with alternative fuel providers and industry partners. We provide training and information. We provide technical assistance. We identify funding, such as grants and tax incentives and rebates, and we provide public recognition and promote various clean transportation events around our area. And we also collect data and track our progress on transitioning to clean transportation in our 5-county territory. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, David Worthington. And David is the fleet manager for the County of Santa Clara, and he manages a fleet of over 2,500 vehicles and pieces of equipment. He has over 34 years of experience in government and private fleet management and in the automotive and truck-related industries. David has won numerous awards and was recently recognized as the 2024 Public Sector Fleet Manager of the Year in North America. So without further ado, here is David Worthington.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here and glad to talk about this topic and share the information and knowledge that I've gained over the last 3+ years, as well as from other fleet managers and fleet professionals here in California. We will have the ability to ask questions, but we ask that you hold those questions till the end of the presentation, and we'll leave ample time to answer everyone's questions. There's also in the presentation a lot of background information and links to various websites where you can get more information about the regulation, as well as videos and information from fleet associations that have been working on outreach on this particular regulation and the impacts it has for government fleets, in particular in California. So we'll start right now. This regulation has significant effects on vehicles, refueling, facilities, staffing, safety, operations, and budget. Literally everything changes in regards to our operations as government entities here in California. The topics that I'm going to cover today: regulatory compliance requirements, the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation and different fleet applications, the state and local government requirements in particular, the definition of what a zero emissions vehicle is, exempted vehicles from the regulation, vehicle and infrastructure time extensions and exemptions, procurement and vehicle disposition requirements, annual and ongoing fleet reporting requirements, and then I've got examples of charging infrastructure costs, EV charging stations, information you need to be aware of, accident damage and related safety considerations, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, challenges with zero emissions vehicles, and then a slide on internal and external collaboration required. And then briefly, I'll talk about logistics with all of this, and then I'll go over the list of resources that are available, and then we'll get into questions and answers. I will not be addressing every item in every slide because we will be sharing the slide deck with all attendees afterwards, so you'll have lots of reference material to follow up on. So there are 3 regulations that are changing how transportation works in California. Particularly, the goal is to reduce the overall emissions that are related to transportation. The state has done a great job at reducing emissions in other areas and facilities and things like that. And as we've done that, the transportation sector has become an increasingly larger percentage of the overall emissions portfolio in California. The Advanced Clean Cars rule, as you see on the left of your screen, requires manufacturers to sell zero emissions vehicles, and those vehicles, as a percentage of their sales, increases every year up until 2035. The next regulation that came out was Advanced Clean Trucks, which, similar to Advanced Clean Cars, requires manufacturers to sell a certain percentage of their overall sales as zero emissions vehicles. And the vehicles that are applied to on the truck side are trucks and vans and larger vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight rating over 8,500 pounds. And then the final regulation is the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. The Advanced Clean Trucks regulation provides the market from which the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation has us purchasing vehicles. So all of these regulations work together, again, to advance the goal to reduce emissions related to transportation in the state of California. And today I'll be focusing mainly on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. There's links below each of these images that go directly to the respective regulation. And you can click at those. It'll be clickable links with the PDF that's shared with you. So there are 4 components to the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. There's the requirement of sales from the manufacturers. There are state and local fleet regulations, drayage trucks, which are the trucks that move in and out of ports, rail yards, and airline facilities, moving goods back and forth. And then high priority fleets, which are your private fleets and your federal fleets. I'll be speaking to the state and local government fleet component. And only that component. There's significant confusion right now because there are 4 different components of this regulation, and each one has different requirements. Some of the requirements are consistent with the other components, but a majority are not. So it's very important to read the appropriate regulation. So for state and local government fleets, again, the vehicles that fall under this regulation are the trucks and vans and larger vehicles that have a gross vehicle weight rating over 8,500 pounds. You need to check your vehicles to verify if they are or are not over that limit. And the best way to do that is you actually go to the vehicle's door jamb and look at the label on the door jamb. There are some half-ton vans that are underneath that threshold as well as over it. And we've run into trucks that are the same situation due to options packages that may have been chosen on the vehicles when they were ordered originally. Included in the regulation is a requirement for government fleets to hire entities that are in compliance with the regulation or are exempt from the regulation. A change with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation compared to other CARB regulation is we are responsible for tracking and keeping documents related to the hiring of entities or approved fleets that will meet the requirements of the ACF. So the regulatory compliance portion is shifted a little bit onto our shoulders, and then the CARB staff, if need be, will edit that documentation. So from January of this year until December 31st, 2026, right now, all the applicable vehicles. If we want to purchase a new vehicle, 50% of our purchases have to be ZEV or near zero emissions vehicles, which I'll talk about in a future slide. Then beginning on January 1st, 2027, every applicable vehicle, truck that we purchase and van will need to be a ZEV vehicle. There are some delays in that regulation, specifically agencies that have divisions or with 10 or fewer trucks. They're exempt until 2027. And there's also law enforcement exemptions and some other exemptions, which I'll go over in future slides. Very important to understand that this is an all-encompassing regulation for transportation in the state. And the way the regulation has been written, it covers a lot of different areas and it's very complex. There is an optional pathway to compliance, which is referred to as the milestone phase-in option. Using this option, a fleet has to have a percentage of their overall fleet at different dates in the future as ZEV. It gives a little bit more flexibility, particularly for fleets that are a little bit more advanced and farther along in infrastructure to support ZEVs, and it gives them a little bit more flexibility. Very important to determine which option your government agency has already chosen, which should have been done in March of this year in your reporting requirements, because they do have different requirements and there's different interesting situations that come up that can create some challenges for fleets. So again, it's very important to know which one your fleet has chosen and follow the guidelines and the regulations that apply to that particular option. This regulatory compliance is not just limited to California. We have another 17 states in the District of Columbia that are piggybacking off of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation as part of the Clean Air Act. Other states can take California's regulations and adopt them into their own states. It's a fairly complicated process, but the bottom line is other states are adapting this regulation and others that California has led the country in. How that affects states that haven't adopted the regulation? Well, in regards to that, 36% of all trucks in the US are sold in these 17 states in California. So all the states that are not adopting this regulation will be impacted because they will have fewer choices on the trucks that are available to purchase. So a zero emissions vehicle is defined as a battery all-electric vehicle, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, and in certain rare instances, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Hybrid vehicles are not considered applicable to this regulation. Shown below is what the requirements are for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles to be able to be chosen to be compliant with the regulation. Right now, there's very few trucks that are being made as plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. We do expect that there may be some available in the 2025, late 2025 to late 2026 timeframe from manufacturers, but it will be a limited number of vehicles that will be plug-in hybrid. So it really leaves our choices down to battery electric trucks or hydrogen fuel cell trucks. Vehicle manufacturers are currently focused on producing the low-hanging fruit type of classes, which are easier to produce as battery electric or hydrogen, and they include delivery vans, minibuses, cargo trucks, transit, and trucks for interstate commerce. Some of the most difficult trucks and vehicles to produce as a zero-emission vehicle are vocational trucks, which are the primary design that are used in government fleets. We will see more of those vehicles becoming available for purchase beginning in the 2026 timeframe. Right now, very limited production capacity from the manufacturers, and the ranges and duty cycles don't meet all of the needs of typical government fleets, whether they be decentralized or centralized in the state. There are some exemptions for vehicles. A list there on the right is the ones that are excluded from the regulations, such as school bus, transit buses, military tactical vehicles, emergency vehicles, and cranes, and some other examples. That does not mean that they're exempt from regulations at all. Most of these vehicles are covered under a different California Air Resources Board regulation, and that is why they're exempted from the ACF. There is a little bit of flexibility, non-repairable vehicles. If you have a truck that's been in an accident, it's a total loss, you'll be able to purchase a replacement truck that is a gasoline, diesel, propane, compressed natural gas, basically a non-ZEV truck, quickly, but it has to be of the same model year or newer to ensure that the emissions being produced by that vehicle are no worse than what the original vehicle was, and hopefully better. Intermittent snow removal vehicles, you may purchase ICE, which is internal combustion engine, an acronym, until 2030, and then an exemption request process must be followed for that. We do have the ability for low usage trucks and vehicles to be exempt from the regulation. It's called the backup vehicle exemption, excludes vehicles operated less than 1,000 miles per year, and an exemption request process must be followed. This is something that's very important for government fleets to be aware of, government agencies. Public works type vehicles are not exempt. Even though they respond to local and regional emergencies or maybe assisting with other agencies within their jurisdiction, they are not exempt. I'm not going to read everything that's on this slide, but this is the language directly from the California Vehicle Code and what the ACF regulation refers to. And again, public works vehicles are not exempt. There are exemptions for vehicles and infrastructure time exemptions. Vehicle exemptions, there is a process where you have to file an exemption. They require significant data and information to be included in your request. The CARB staff have up to 45 days after receiving the request to respond with either an approval of the request or a denial, or if they don't respond within 45 days, the request is automatically approved. Infrastructure time extensions also require lots of data and information, including directly from your utility provider, in order to qualify for an exemption due to various situations that come up in the installation of the infrastructure to support ZEVs, whether it be charging station infrastructure or hydrogen fuel station infrastructure. On the slide, it lists the delays, how many years you have them. There's multiple delay processes that you can, or extension you can apply for, and they have different timelines. There currently is not an appeal process to dispute an exemption or extension request that has been denied by CARB. So it's very important to collect all the information up front before you submit your extension or your exemption request. CARB staff have stated that they will work with fleets if there's missing information in the exemption or extension request and give them an opportunity to fill in those gaps so they're looking at all the correct data and most up-to-date information to make their decision on either denying the request or approving the request. There are procurement requirements as part of the regulation. Again, we have to hire or act or dispatch compliant fleets. And compliant fleets are private or government agency fleets in compliance with the ACF regulation at the time they are hired and throughout the term of any contract or an agreement, or if they're exempt from the ACF regulation. The fleets and private fleets in California or other government agencies that are exempt from the ACF regulation will need to provide your agency an attestation that they are exempt from the regulation. And then we as the government agencies need to retain that attestation and have it available for CARB staff to view at any time that they request it. There's a check for verification that each fleet will be hired or dispatched is listed on a CARB ACF webpage. That's something in the future that will hopefully be in place by 2025, where we can check very quickly if a fleet is compliant with the regulation as a compliant fleet or they are not. If they're not on the list, then we would reach out to them for an attestation that they are exempt from the regulation. If they can't provide that, then we're not able to hire them to provide work for our government agencies that involves ACF applicable vehicles. There's disclosure of the regulation that we need to make to hired or dispatched fleets. So we need to follow up with all our vendors that have applicable vehicles or may or may not have applicable vehicles to the ACF. And we need to make sure that they're aware that they need to be compliant with the ACF regulation. We also, when we sell or auction off a vehicle, we need to disclose through the auction company or to the purchaser of the potential that they may need to be in compliant with the ACF regulation by purchasing a particular truck or vehicle that we've disposed of. We also have to, there's other record keeping requirements. They're very detailed. I'm not going into all of the details in regards to that in this presentation, but just be aware that we need to hold on to all that documentation for up to 5 years. There's annual and ongoing fleet report requirements. Annually, we need to supply through a CARB website the status of our fleet. We have to update the information annually, as well as if we purchase a new vehicle that is an ACF applicable vehicle or retire an ACF applicable vehicle, we need to report that into the same software within 30 days. There's quite a bit of work that needs to be done around the reporting requirements. The reporting that we did initially has taken fleets anywhere from small fleets 40 to 50 hours to comply with, up to larger fleets where it could be up to 1,000 hours that we've done previously to get to the point that we're at right now in calendar year 2024. I want to provide you an example of charging infrastructure costs. They're extensive. This is 454 trucks that are applicable in our fleet currently. And this is what we've estimated for a 5-year forecast of installing charging stations and the supporting infrastructure for all 454 vehicles. So in total, we're looking at over $28 million. And that estimate does not include the acquisition cost delta between electric vehicles and the current trucks and vans that we operate that are powered by gasoline, diesel, compressed natural gas, propane, or whatever. We have 48 plus owned and leased sites that we need to electrify, and 13 of those sites have limited local electric grid capacity, which becomes a very complicated issue. And that's why in the regulation, there are time extensions for getting your grid infrastructure installed to be able to support the installation of charging stations. When all is said and done in the next 5 years, when we have all 454 trucks converted over to either electric or hydrogen, right now we're estimating electric vehicles just because we're limited on hydrogen station availability for trucks in the greater County of Santa Clara. We're estimating 63 megawatts of daily electricity consumption, which is equivalent to the city of Chino's electricity needs each day, or the city of Concord's. And that is also the equivalent of approximately 7 Empire State Buildings, or between 28,000 and 47,000 typical homes on a daily basis. That is just for one fleet. When you get into different zones of areas of your cities and your counties, you'll find consolidation of fleets in those areas, multiple fleets. So when you look at that and you multiply it by all those fleets, it's easy to see why local grid infrastructure is going to be a challenge to be able to support the transition of these trucks to either battery electric or making the choice to go down the path of hydrogen fuel cell electric. Here's some cost examples, and these are based on real world averages. Included a couple pictures to show some of the challenges with electric charging station infrastructure. On average, to date, for our fleet here, we on the level 2 charging stations, which are the ones that are up to 240 volts, most common stations you'll see out in public, it averages us about $31,000 per station for the infrastructure. When we look at the DC chargers, which are often referred to as fast charging, it is much more expensive. On average, we're looking at $313,000 per installation. And that data is from current projects where we're installing 12 stations with 22 ports at 7 sites within 2 different cities. These costs are expected to increase over the next 5 years. Kilowatt hour utility costs are expected to increase over the next 5 years because they also need to cover their costs in the upgrades they need to do to local, regional, and statewide infrastructure to support supplying the electrical needs of private and government fleets in California. Here are some examples of alternative ways to power electric vehicles. It's short-term solutions, particularly when you're running into a problem with either local grid infrastructure, delays in equipment such as switching gear, breaker panels, things like that. These are different solutions that are out there. We're seeing battery trailer charging stations where they get towed to a site. They have a battery inside the trailer as well as a charging station. You can charge up the vehicle at any site that it can park next to this trailer. There's also propane-powered generator charging stations that are available. That's a temporary solution, and we do expect in the future that we will see permits for those being declined. Then we have mobile on-site charging where it's movable, where it can be moved from one part of a facility out to where the vehicles are actually parked, and then the vehicles plug into it. And then we've got solar charging stations, and then down at the right-hand corner, a hydrogen fuel cell generator microgrid charging station. The costs vary between $90,000 and $12 million, depending on which of these solutions you're looking at. And depending on the size of your fleet, you may need multiples of each of these examples in order to fuel up the vehicles, refuel the vehicles until you have local hydrogen or electric charging station grid infrastructure installed. Charging stations vary from dumb charging station to what is referred to smart charging stations in the industry. Dumb charging stations are basically ports where you plug in the cord from the port into the vehicle and it charges the vehicle. There's no control other than the vehicle controlling the amount of energy going into it and stopping the charge session when the battery is full. There's a variety of specifications. Highly recommended when you're looking at any of these, you get written documentation on the output of all the charge ports when they're used simultaneously. We have run into situations where the marketing material states that the charging station has a 120 kilowatt hour capacity for both ports on the station. And when we actually use those stations, we find out that when 2 vehicles are plugged in at the same time, it cuts that down to 50 kilowatt hours or less because it's the total amount that the station can supply, not per port. So it's very important to check that. A significant challenge that's come up recently that the industry is adapting to, during a power interruption, whether it be for a couple minutes or hours or a day, if you have a vehicle plugged into a charging station, it may not restart the charge session when the power comes back on. In fact, research that we've done here at the County of Santa Clara, we've only found 2 charging station manufacturers where it will restart after a power interruption, and majority of the stations don't do that. The problem with that is when you have a 55 or more facilities that are now being used also for electricity for charging stations, if they have a power interruption in the middle of the night, somebody is going to have to go out there and manually disconnect the vehicle from the charging station, reset the charging station, reconnect the vehicle for the charge session to begin again. That's very difficult if you're trying to get a charge session of between 6 and 10 hours and for a vehicle to recharge its battery and have a full capacity to be used the following morning. So very significant, be very specific in asking and verifying from any manufacturer you're working with what happens when there's a power interruption. Most common challenges we have with charging stations are related to software right now. Customer support is critical. We're hearing from various fleets throughout California and the country that certain manufacturers and management companies, it's very hard to get through to customer support, which is causing their stations to be down and offline for extended periods of time. Vocational trucks, again, are the biggest challenge right now in the industry for either hydrogen, fuel cell, electric drive systems, or all electric. There may be instances where the battery in the vocational truck cannot be used to power any other equipment on the truck, such as a crane, an aerial device, a generator, a welder, or anything like that, an air compressor. In that situation, you may need to install an additional auxiliary battery to power up that equipment, which then means you actually need to have two different charging stations, one to charge the vehicle's motive battery and one to recharge the auxiliary battery for the equipment operating on the back of the truck. It's something you need to be aware of and look into. Right now, we don't see any stations that offer level 2 and a level 1 for the auxiliary equipment, or a DC and a level 2 for the auxiliary equipment. So it's something very important to look at when you're trying to figure out which manufacturer has a ZEV that will meet your needs. Maintenance facility remodels, new construction, or extensions to the building is a significant challenge because it's very costly. From a safety standpoint, these higher amperage battery electric buses and trucks, we need a safe clearance of 10 feet between that vehicle and the next closest metal object. Most fleet maintenance facilities have been designed to use every inch or every square foot as efficiently as possible, and they don't have a 10-foot clearance in all directions in the workway, particularly when a vehicle is put up on a lift, as the middle picture shows, and the roof of the facility, where we've been, as an industry, installing overhead piping and reels to avoid tripping hazards on the floor and to ensure we avoid OSHA violations as well. So you need to look at each of your facilities, start doing measurements, look at what the typical vehicles will be worked on inside the facility, and see if you need to do a remodel, extension, or build a new facility. Please don't depend on dealerships to meet your service and maintenance needs. They have the same challenge, and they're trying to work through it as well as the rest of the private government fleets in California. And what we expect in the short term is there'll be a significant backlog of their ability to work on vehicles and equipment. Accident damage, it's something that gets talked about a little bit, but not enough in the industry at the moment. It's getting better. But one of the things everybody refers to is the training that's being provided by the manufacturers to first responders, which are typically police, fire, and tow truck drivers. But the reality is fleet staff are also included in that group of people, because it's very often that we'll have a vehicle come into our facility that's run over something in the roadway, hit a curb, hit a rock, somebody else is backed into it, and there's damage to the vehicle that goes unreported or unseen by police, fire, or tow truck drivers. Those vehicles, when they're a battery electric vehicle using the skateboard design shown in the right-hand lower corner, the batteries can be damaged, and if they are, they can go into what's called a thermal runaway event, which is the fires that you will see on daily news that people seem to want to really trump up that it's a bad problem. So when the vehicles come into a fleet facility, we now need to be looking underneath the vehicle, around the vehicle for damage. If we see a battery pack that's damaged, the vehicle needs to be quarantined. And the quarantine, depending on the OEM manufacturer, can be from as short as 48 hours to as long as 2 weeks. and the vehicles need to be quarantined with no other vehicle or metal around them from a minimum distance of 50-foot radius to the larger trucks, 150-foot radius, which is basically a 300-foot diameter, which you can equate to a football field. And here's examples of our main fleet facility. We do not have room to quarantine light-duty EVs on the property because we don't have a 100-foot diameter anywhere on the property that isn't being currently used. And again, the medium and heavy-duty trucks are requiring a 150-foot radius, which is 300 feet diameter. Most towing vendors currently do not have space to store damaged EVs in their lots, and they've already encountered where a battery that's started a thermal runaway event at the accident scene has been dealt with, and then they take it on their tow truck and it reignites, or they get to their tow yard and it reignites. These are all things that you need to be aware of and planning for. EV accident repair damage costs are between 27 and 43% higher. If you're using an insurance company for covering your vehicles for collision and comprehensive claims, just be aware that once the battery pack module has any damage to it, the insurance companies total out the vehicle because the risk is too high for them to replace the battery or ignore the damage in the long term. Also, one of the trends that's happening worldwide with electric vehicles currently is insurance and risk management companies are beginning to evaluate overnight parking locations for EV trucks and buses and take-home vehicle programs. Both of those represent a high risk to the insurance companies or to the owners of the vehicles if one of the vehicles should have a battery catch fire and burn down or catch fire, other vehicles parked next to it, facilities, or for the take-home vehicles, an employee's garage. So those are things that you should be aware of. This is another one of our sites that we are looking at prepping for our quarantine area because we do have a 100-foot, 300-foot diameters where we could park 3 damaged EVs at one time, or we can park 1 damaged medium and heavy-duty truck on site for up to 2 weeks. Things to be aware of is damaged EVs need to be parked on concrete, asphalt, or gravel. They need to be far away from any vegetation that could potentially catch on fire. And again, they need to remain in quarantine for between 48 hours and 2 weeks, depending on the manufactured vehicle. They also, during the quarantine, need to be monitored to be aware if a thermal runaway event is beginning or is spreading internally through the battery pack. So thermal imaging camera systems need to be available and pointing at the battery pack wherever it may be located on these quarantine vehicles. The EV fires can reach temperatures up to 1400 degrees, which the batteries don't create hazardous waste, but everything else that may burn in a vehicle can create hazardous waste. And fire departments, it takes between 2,500 to 20,000 gallons of water to contain an EV battery fire. That's not to put it out, that's to cool it down to keep it from becoming larger. The water can be considered hazardous waste depending on what has burned inside the vehicle or on the side of the vehicle separate from the battery. So you also need to be aware that if that water gets into a storm drain or into a nearby creek, then it will or may trigger a hazmat response. And typical hazmat responses, depending on the size, are anywhere from a low of $5,000 to $40,000 or more. And the latest guidance being given to first responders as far as fire companies are they need to evaluate whether to let the vehicle burn out or to attempt to try to cool down the batteries with water because of the challenge of the amount of water that may be needed. And again, storm drains or creeks that may be nearby. Employee safety is critical. Working on these high voltage systems as well as high amperage and high capacity batteries, our staff are going to need to now have certifications in high voltage systems and also in the safety of dealing with an incident that may become available in the workplace. So they have to have contact release training. They have to recertify every year. And then the high voltage systems, again, they have to have the manufacturer training or something equivalent. There's training and certification there that has to be renewed every year. And then there's PPE or personal protective equipment that needs to be purchased, needs to be inspected and recertified on an annual basis. Electricity in general, it doesn't take much to stop the heart of somebody. The main reason that we don't see that happening very often is because of our skin. Our skin is very resistant, and the electricity doesn't get past it typically to the heart to stop a person's beating heart, but it doesn't take much. We're talking milliamps of energy. The chart on the left-hand side will give you an example. A 100-watt light bulb is more than enough to kill somebody if it wasn't for the skin that they have. On the far right, it gives you an example of all the protective equipment we now need to have available in use for maintaining and repairing battery electric trucks and vehicles, large vehicles. Very important. Need to start working on that now. There are certification programs that are available from various sources to go down that path, and then each government agency should use what they learn from that certification process to make sure that they have a good program in place to protect their employees, the public, and any other government person that walks into their facility. Hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, I believe in them. I think they're a great solution for different duty cycles, that electric batteries are not an ideal choice. The problem we have is the infrastructure. In California, since 2009, there's only been 79 hydrogen fuel stations that have been made available and operational in the public. On any given day, about 20% of those are out of service due to maintenance and repairs. And as an example, in California, we have over 10,000 fuel stations for gasoline, diesel, propane, compressed natural gas, liquid natural gas in the state. And since then, the numbers have actually gone down. We've lost a number of stations, and they're not coming back until more are built. The fuel is very expensive, and building a station is between $1.5 and $7 million each, not including the cost of the property. And that's also dependent upon how many trucks need to go to that facility to refuel. And again, here's a chart directly from the Hydrogen Consortium in regards to the stations. This is most up-to-date data that I pulled from 2 days ago. We have 23 fewer stations in the state in the last 5 years. And we do have quite a few stations that are planned for light-duty vehicles, your sedans, light-duty trucks. We don't have a whole lot planned for the medium and heavy-duty right now. So the public network for hydrogen is just not it won't meet what we need. So that's why for our fleet, we're focusing on battery electric. This is a slide that came through the collaboration with multiple fleet managers and early adopters of these technologies. These are all the entities that have to collaborate for a successful transition to zero emissions vehicles and also being in compliance with the ACF regulation. This is all encompassing as far as the regulation, its impacts on government agencies and private businesses. A lot of work, a lot of staff time, and there may be a need to increase staff to do all this work, contract out to consultants or other outside vendors that can help fleets make the transition. This is a graphic that I had created to give an example of the logistical challenges with the ACF regulations. It's looking at an airport. The vehicles are the airplanes, but they're being built in the air. We have a lot of vehicles, ZEB vehicles that are not available yet. They're still being made. They're still being tested. They may not be available for us to purchase for 2 years or another 5 or even longer time frame. We're trying to build up the refueling infrastructure, which represents a runway. We're trying to have that runway done when the the vehicles are available for us to purchase so we avoid stranded assets. Then we've got to have the electric grid infrastructure out to all the different locations that we need to have available for vehicles to recharge. And then we're trying to wait for public refueling infrastructure to catch up to us, and grid capacity, and new construction, and delays in construction, delays in equipment that are related to construction or electric vehicle grids. There's just a lot of moving pieces at any given time, and all this work costs a considerable amount of money. So this is an example of what we're dealing with as government and private fleets, and trying to have everything come together to minimize the effects on daily operations that are supported by vehicles and pieces of equipment. These are some resources that are available to you. These are clickable links in the PDF. It's a 5-part webinar series that myself and another fleet manager created, and it goes into hyper detail on a lot of unknowns that need to be dealt with the transition to zero emissions vehicles. We've separated out the topics that are covered in each of the 5 parts, so you can actually choose which one of the 5 videos to watch first, and then follow up with the rest when it's convenient for you. These are resources from the California Air Resources Board. These are websites that we use on a daily basis, tracking the regulation, new information, submitting documents, submitting our reports, double checking in the future if a hired entity fleet has a ACF certification, or if they don't, so we can follow up with the ones that don't. CARB has done a great job adding videos, improving their fact sheets, and also getting into different tools that can be used to estimate your electrical needs, cost comparisons, things like that. Highly recommend each government agency go to the CARB's ACF website and go through all this information. It's very helpful. One of the best resources that every government agency can have is by registering for CARB's listserver and receiving emails about the ACF regulation immediately from CARB. Very, very important. There's a lot of work that's going on. There's new information that's being put out by CARB staff, new interpretations of the actual regulatory language that can change your strategy in maintaining compliance with the regulation. Very important. It's a quick way of getting information without having to go back and check multiple website pages on CARB's website. CARB also has a great web page that's called the ZEV Truck Stop website on funding sources. These are just some examples of the many funding sources that are out there. Please be aware that each of these programs, you need to read the actual program and administration requirements very carefully. The majority of the money that's being made available through grants and programs currently is requiring the charging stations to be publicly accessible and in certain locations. That will limit the fleet's ability to apply for that program, because they may not have vehicles in the right places, or they may not be able to open up their facilities for public use of the charging stations. So I want to thank these agencies and fleet industries that have helped with this presentation. We are sharing a lot of information on a weekly basis to try to get it out to as many government and private fleets as we can. It's a very complex regulation. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's some expenses and budgetary challenges, as well as impacts on operations from the transition to zero emissions vehicles. So MEMA, their chapters have been very helpful. Obviously, the Silicon Valley Clean Cities, and then NAFA, which is the National Association of Fleet Administrators. Each one of these associations, I highly encourage you to join the associations or have people on staff that are already members of it. There's a lot of great information that's being shared through these organizations. So now we've left time for questions, and I'm open to any questions that you may have. Please use the function to raise your hand, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Everyone, the raise hand feature is at the bottom of the screen. Just click on it. And we've set aside about a half an hour or so for a question and answer. We'll be here as long as you like to answer all your questions.
Great. Ray, I see you have a question.
Yes, I mean, I have a lot of concerns over the all electric. I think it's, it works in moderate climates. And there's some concerns like when Arrowhead got frozen and they couldn't get in or out. And if you're stuck on electricity, you're toast. But I wanted to ask, because these electric vehicles, they can catch fire at delayed times. What if someone parked underneath a hotel or an apartment complex and one of those fire situations happened and there were all EVs in there, and you get the chain reaction, but you're underneath a hotel or an apartment building?
Yeah, that's a significant challenge. That's occurred in a couple places of the world already. Not so much a hotel, but parking garages where the heat from one transit bus, EV transit bus, when it went into a thermal runaway event, caught other transit buses next to it on fire. And when the combined amount of heat and energy from all of those affected the entire parking structure. The lower levels that were right above the transit buses, the concrete overheated. A good example of what's possible, may not be highly likely, but possible, is what happened down in LA recently when they had the fire on the 405, underneath the 405, that was fueled by pallets and vehicles that were underneath that portion of the 405 and the amount of work that they needed to do to it.
Well, the bridge going underneath LAX says no tanker vehicles, but you're carrying something that's going to burn just as bad.
Yeah, significant challenges with thermal runaway events. That's why it's very important to choose wisely on the vehicles, the designs.
Yeah, but they're eventually all going to be those vehicles.
Yes. What we will see in the future is when we get to a tipping point of 50% of the vehicles on the road in California are EVs, is when we'll really have a good gauge of how large or how small the challenge is. Because right now, we don't have that many electric vehicles when you look at the total number of vehicles moving on a daily basis in California on the roads. So we really don't have true accident data. And the accident data is what's going to primarily cause some of these batteries to go into a thermal runaway event. However, battery manufacturers are moving towards different technology and chemistry in the batteries, and we're hopeful that in the near future, this problem will be eliminated just through the designs and chemical.
Well, you showed all this, the protection that, like firefighters would have to have so they don't get electrocuted getting somebody out of a vehicle.
Yes.
But if you're the occupant of the vehicle and you are threatened by getting electrocuted trying to climb out versus waiting for the thing to catch on fire, that's an awkward position.
Yeah, there's systems in the vehicle to shut off the high voltage wiring. There's systems in the vehicle to disconnect portions of the battery pack module. To date, most people have been able to get out of the car other than in accidents where the doors are jammed shut. I'm not aware of anybody being electrocuted. I am aware of smoke inhalation and deaths caused by that.
There was one in Palos Verdes where the girl got burnt to death in the car.
Yeah, there are challenges with this. In my opinion, there are more challenges than gasoline or diesel vehicles when they catch fire or compressed natural gas. It is a reality of what we're going to have to deal with. That's why safety is so critical. Education, training, certifications, the right PPE, understanding where you're parking the vehicles, understanding quarantine, making sure that your fleet or the company that you contract with is regularly looking underneath these EVs to ensure there's no damage to the battery packs.
That's why I don't like the mandate. I'd prefer to evolve so the problems can be worked out.
Yeah, understood.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Carrie, I see your raised hand. I have.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, there we go.
So I just have a question more about making sure we're complying. We're a small fleet. We have less than 10 medium heavy duty vehicles, so we would be exempt until 2027 related to our own fleet. But we hire a separate company to do our trash collection. We hire a separate entity to do some of the landscaping maintenance. And so understanding just because we are exempt until 2027 for our own fleet does not mean we're exempt in terms of requiring those entities we hire to be in compliance already. Is that correct?
That is correct. One of those 5-part video series that I referred to is dedicated to procurement, reporting, and collecting documents that are required as part of the ACF regulation. I encourage you to go and watch that because there's a lot of work in that area. A lot of work. A lot of administrative work.
Yeah. Yes.
Originally, when CARB came out with the language for the regulation before it was actually approved by the CARB board, we had conversations, different fleet managers and associations with them about the language that they included in there about hiring entities. Because at the time, it could be perceived, especially for public works projects, that we would either have to have the general contractor or a government agency employee track every vehicle that came on site in every fleet to find out if it was compliant with ACF, which a typical public works project, you're dealing with contractors, subcontractors, subcontractors or subcontractors. The layers of people that are involved in it are massive, and trying to track every single vehicle that's coming on site. Who owns the vehicle? Is it a rental truck? Is it a leased truck? Is it an owned truck? Are they in compliance with the regulation or not in compliance with the regulation? Would have been a massive undertaking. Through a lot of work with CARB staff, lots of meetings and discussions, they have given guidance to fleets that we only, or government agencies, we only have to track if the general contractor we hired is compliant with ACF, and the general contractor is responsible down one layer of subcontractors to track that, which was a major change and a huge workload burden lifted from government agencies. And one thing to be aware of, part of the regulation for the private sector, who the regulation applies to is any fleet that has 50 or more trucks or $50 million of gross revenue anywhere in the United States. So even if a private fleet has one truck in California, if they have more than $50 million in gross revenue in other states, then that truck falls under the ACF regulation, even though the regulation says it's 50 or more trucks. You could have 50 or more trucks and not go over the $50 million threshold. So it captures different types of fleets, private fleets in California.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you. I don't see any other questions at this time. If you'd like me to go into more detail on a particular topic, please raise your hand and let me know. Typically, when we do the full 5-part series of the regulation, it's about a 2.5-hour presentation, and it covers a lot of detail. But in the industry as well, at the manufacturing level, the electric utility providers level, and CARB staff level, we are all in a situation that I refer to as we don't know what we don't know, all of us. And it's taken a massive collaboration of all entities to learn things and then pass that information on to everybody else within this space as quickly as possible. There's just so many variables, so many unknowns. Fleets are so radically different than anybody could imagine. The types of vehicles are radically different than anybody could imagine. And then we're also feeling the effects of the Advanced Clean Cars regulation on manufacturers and the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation on manufacturers. And a good example is currently in California, I've been trying to locate a compact cargo van to purchase. None of the manufacturers are selling them in California anymore. In order for them to meet the percentage requirements for their ZEV sales, and what happens is if you can't buy a half-ton compact van, then it forces you to buy a half-ton van, which falls under the ACF regulation if it's not under 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. So all of a sudden, we have vans that we were going to replace that weren't going to be impacted by ACF, where now our only choice is to buy vans that are impacted by ACF. And currently, as a government fleet, that means if I have 10 vans I need to purchase right now, 5 of them can be, it's up to us, gasoline, diesel, ICE engine vehicles. But then the other 50%, the other 5, have to be zero electric or hydrogen electric vans. So that's an unintended consequence from the ACT regulation and how it's affecting us in being compliant with the ACF regulation.
David, Daniel Brame has his hand up, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. You should be able to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, you should be able to hear me.
Great, thank you.
And it sort of follows along the topic you were just discussing. So between now and the end of 2026, where 50% of the purchases, if you're on that pathway, can be or must be zero emission, can you purchase a vehicle that's electric, that's above the 8,500 gross vehicle weight rating limit in order to purchase, have that purchase be electric in order to purchase a much heavier vehicle that electric can't meet the needs of?
Yes, absolutely. In the regulation, that was something that we fought for as a government agency very vigorously for. So yes, as an example, if you've got let's just use a garbage truck as an example, very large truck. There are some electric garbage trucks out there, but some of them won't meet your duty cycles or your needs correctly or properly. So you've got to buy a diesel one. Well, the 50% ratio, that means you have to buy a ZEV. Well, the ZEV to meet that ratio could be a half-ton Ford Lightning EV truck. Could be a Chevy
That's
Silverado.
exactly what I was
EV.
asking. Perfect.
Yeah. Now, it's very important to understand if you use the milestone option, that's completely different.
Yeah.
So it only applies to the normal, what we refer to as the normal purchase schedule option. And within the normal purchase schedule option, we have also been given leadway as a government fleet. We can hold on to our current vehicles as long as we want. We only have to purchase ZEVs when we're purchasing a new replacement vehicle or adding a vehicle to our fleet. So it's given government fleets more time to get the infrastructure into the ground. The only problem with that is we're holding on to vehicles longer than we normally would. So repair costs and maintenance costs are going up. But those costs are actually less than typically trying to get infrastructure installed immediately at all costs to be able to power or support a ZEV truck.
Great.
A great
Thank
question.
you. Actually, that reminds me of a different question I've heard discussed previously. Do you know, in terms of total cost of ownership, if electric vehicles typically have lower mechanical maintenance costs than an ICE vehicle?
They can. I've been working with EVs since 2007 and running all the data. It depends on the vehicle. It depends on the type of vehicle. It depends on if you own your own electrical charging station and the infrastructure to power it, or if you're using public stations. There's a lot of variables, but yes, they can be cheaper. What we're seeing right now is in the medium and heavy truck space where EV trucks are available, initially they are not cheaper, they're more expensive. We do expect in the future that cost will come down, but what we're finding typical with any new vehicle introduction, the first couple of years are problematic. Warranty issues, challenges with software, a lot of software challenges right now in our industry. In fact, we have the highest recalls in the history of the US manufacturing of vehicles right now, last 2 years. And a majority of those recalls are related to software. And unfortunately, these hydrogen electric and all electric trucks, medium and heavy duty, are driven by software. But that will get better. The systems will become more reliable. And at some point in the future, they will be less costly than our current ICE vehicles. How soon? I don't know. I can tell you right now that they're still, the ZEV vehicles are much more expensive than what we're currently using.
Got it. Thanks again.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Pardon me, David, a gentleman named Luis Perez has put a question in the Q&A. But if Luis, if you can please just raise your hand and ask it directly to David.
I see what he posted.
Okay.
What he posted, I'll make sure everybody's aware of it. We are required to retire 3 vehicles, even if they run less than 1,000 miles. Luis, I will need to have you raise your hand, and so we can unmute you, because I need to understand why you would retire vehicles or are required to retire the vehicles. Are they just reached a point where they're not cost effective to continue to own? Or is there something else going on there? If you could raise your hand, I'll make sure to unmute you right away.
Oh, he said he doesn't have a mic, David.
Ah, okay. Can you type in why you're required to retire those 3 vehicles? Are you using the milestone option? That could be a reason. While Luis is typing in a response, the milestone option, I don't recommend it for government fleets, because it takes away some of the flexibility that we have in being able to delay the replacement of vehicles. It also takes away the 50% rule that we have for the next couple of years. And there's been some unintended consequences from fleets going down that pathway, particularly, and I'll give you an example, the exemption process, as we were told or educated by CARB staff on, is you could supply an exemption request for a vehicle that there is no ZEV equivalent out in the marketplace. Well, if you're using the milestone option, what CARB is wanting you to do now, instead of submitting one piece of paper and all the documentation to support it, you now have to supply all the same documentation for the rest of your fleet vehicles. Because CARB's response is, well, in that particular vehicle, because you're under the milestone option, and you have to have a percentage of your fleet that is all ZEVs at different time frames, well, then what other vehicle can you replace with a ZEV to meet the percentage instead of that one vehicle? And so all of a sudden you went from what we've estimated for the fleets that have submitted exemption requests on the vehicle side so far, it takes anywhere from 10 to 20 hours worth of work per exemption request to have all the documentation, do all the research in regards to ZEVs that are out there, ZEVs that are not meeting your needs. Now you've gone from 20 to 40 hours for one exemption request to collecting all the same data and information. Let's say you have a fleet of 10 vehicles. You multiply that 20 hours or 40 hours times 10 vehicles. So all of a sudden your administrative workload has increased by tenfold because you were using the milestone option. So very important to understand which option your government agency has chosen and understand how that impacts your strategies and planning and the installation of infrastructure or identifying publicly available infrastructure to either recharge or refuel the vehicles. Luis, I didn't see a response or typed in answer. Oh, there we go. Hold on. Yes, we have a 2006 GMC T6500 with the aftermarket exhaust filter that is required to be, okay. So you have a vehicle that fell under the regulation of having to upgrade the diesel particulate filter system on the vehicle or install one to reduce its emissions. It's a previous regulation that we had to deal with starting in 2007 for government fleets. And it was a government fleet only regulation at the time. So because you don't have that filter on that truck, you do have to retire it. So if you have 3 of them, you've got to retire all 3 of them. So if you have to buy 3 replacement vehicles, Right now, 2 of those vehicles would have to be ZEVs if they're available, because you need to look at the rounding. Because 3 vehicles, you divide it in half is 1.5. You have to round up according to CARB staff and the regulations. So you'd have to buy 2 ZEVs, and that would allow you to purchase a diesel, propane, compressed natural gas truck that may be what you're using now, or diesel in this case. You're going to have to reach out to CARB staff on that, because currently you've got to be collecting, I'm sorry, follow-up question was, but even if they moved in less than 1,000 miles, there is the 1,000 mile exemption, but you have to have 10% of your fleet already ZEVs before you can take advantage of that. And you've also got to have a lot of data showing that they'll be used for under 1,000 miles, which means you have to submit an exemption request. And they're going to want data, whether it be telematics data showing how far they drive every day, how many miles they drive every day, or data from the pre and post trip inspection showing the odometer readings, and have that average out on a daily basis, monthly basis. There's administrative workload there, and unfortunately, I hate to tell you that, but it's quite extensive. And not a problem. You're welcome. Glad to answer that question for you.
David, I don't know if you can see, I have my hand raised.
Oh,
I want to ask a question, even though I'm helping run this. Since there are a number of elected officials on this webinar, obviously all our fleet managers throughout the state are facing great challenges, all our public and private fleet managers, but especially public fleet managers. So how can the elected officials throughout the state, the mayors and county supervisors, city managers, council members, support their fleet managers, their fleet people during this transition? There's obviously, we're trying to let them know about the huge operational impacts and the budgetary impacts. So if you can kind of speak to that as far as a overall picture of how they can best support their fleet managers.
great question. Thank you. Biggest support you can provide is by listening to them and hearing what the challenges are and helping provide resources to them, whether it be such as Silicon Valley Clean Cities, reaching out to them to have them work with the fleet, do some analysis of the fleet, hiring consultants, finding the budgetary funds to do this. The acquisition costs for an electric truck, for example, are between 1.5 to 5 times more expensive than a diesel, gasoline, or other internal combustion engine power plant. So there's lots of money that's needed up front to purchase the trucks. But then you've got the infrastructure, charging or refueling infrastructure. Then you have, again, maintenance facilities. There's a lot of costs involved with all of this. And in our industry, we're all trying to come up with rule of thumb costs to share with other fleets right now, but they vary widely depending on your fleet, where it's located, local infrastructure, how you run your fleet. It's mainly listening to your fleet people, providing staffing resources when they request it, because the administrative workload is significantly greater, providing resources for them to attend events, whether they be local, regional, statewide, or nationwide, sending them to the Advanced Clean Transportation Conference, an expo held every year, sending them to the government fleet conferences held every year, having them join different fleet associations regionally or nationally. The amount of information that's needed to effectively strategize and implement plans is massive right now. And it's at the same time that we're being affected by baby boomers retiring nationwide, which a majority of those people that are retiring work in government. We currently have a shortage of qualified fleet managers and future fleet managers in the industry, and particularly in California. And so it's also a matter of looking at who you have in a fleet management role and trying to determine how much longer they may be here. There's been a number of fleet managers in California that have retired early because they looked at the workload of complying with the ACF regulation and the fact that they weren't going to receive the resources necessarily, and that they were set up to fail in the last years of their career, and so they retired. I'm hearing more and more from fleet managers up and down the state that they're very concerned because executive management, officials, elected officials aren't aware of this regulation or aren't significantly been educated about its overall impacts to everything. The first slide I started with had the words, and everything changes. Literally everything changes in California with this regulation. It has major impacts and a lot of unintended consequences that we're slowly finding out about. The cost of goods and services in California is going to increase. Inflation in California is going to be greater than the average inflation rate nationwide. These fleet people need all the support they can get, the education, the ability to learn from vendors, to make the right choices. It's a rough ride. I hate to say that, but it's a rough ride for everybody. So whatever support you can give them will pay off greatly.
Yeah, not to mention, as you were alluding to, the budget costs of buying of this transition for infrastructure and the vehicles. They're going to have to, make some tough budget choices, but it's going to have to be done.
Yes. And then the other thing is to support your fleet personnel when they say they think they can reduce the fleet size because of underutilized vehicles. Doing that's a great way to avoid some of these costs. If you reduce your fleet size, you don't have as many vehicles that you need to transition to zero emission vehicles. But we've heard from fleet managers and professionals throughout California that reducing the fleet size, they get pushback because departments, divisions, individuals believe that they have to have a vehicle, whether it's used every day or used once a month. And there's alternatives to that. Supporting the reduction of your fleet is very important. Any other questions I can answer today for anyone? Let me tell you what I foresee as my top 3 challenges with our transition to zero emissions vehicles. Currently, because we're focusing on battery electric, even though we have hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in our fleet. Number 1 challenge we have is getting accurate and detailed information from the manufacturers of these vehicles. It was brought up earlier about temperatures that these vehicles operate in, where they go to areas where it snows or it's very cold, and they don't go as far. The batteries don't work well outside of an engineered temperature range. But getting that data from the manufacturers has been very difficult. And so unfortunately, fleets are learning the hard way about that. Charging station manufacturers, the reliability of the charging stations, the fact that we have this power interruption problem, which is not entirely their fault. It's also a portion of the OEM manufacturers. When there's a power interruption, they don't want to restart the vehicle because they need to make sure everything's working safely so nobody gets electrocuted from an accident. There's all sorts of safety features put into the vehicles and the charging stations, yet we've got this situation and a power interruption where all of a sudden the vehicle stops charging. That's a major challenge, especially for counties and state agencies that respond to localized and regional disasters, and they're supplying vehicles and services to smaller cities or areas of the county. We've got to have vehicles that are going to be able to be charged every day. We're used to having backup generators to power our fuel stations. Well, that goes away when those fuel stations are our electric charging stations. We've got to have either a microgrid or some other way to ensure that we have the capacity to recharge vehicles in an emergency. And then the third one, which is the obvious one, is the cost. Originally, when this regulation was being developed, everything that was being talked about was the acquisition cost of the vehicles and the cost of the charging station infrastructure or hydrogen fuel station infrastructure. What was not being talked about is modifying, extending, or building brand new fleet maintenance facilities. I built one in my career so far, and through a lot of research in California, on average, there's only about 1 or 2 new fleet facilities constructed every year. And in the government sector, There's a high number of them that are between 30 and 40 years old and are due for replacement just naturally. It's expensive to build a fleet maintenance facility, modify one or remodel one to meet the safety requirements necessary for our employees and the general public to come into the facility while we have either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric. And each one of them requires different safety aspects to them. And that's all very expensive. The training is expensive. Everything we're doing in this space is expensive, more expensive than what we're used to. And so unfortunately, we need a lot more budget resources. But those are the top three challenges I see right now. I do see it as far as an industry, we already have challenges finding and hiring qualified candidates in all positions in our industry, but that is only going to get more difficult when you start looking at fleet supervisors and fleet managers. Their ages are, on average, are very high, and they're all starting to retire. And we have seen different government agencies in California have recruitments open for a fleet manager from anywhere from 3 months up to a year without filling it. There's just not that many people to fill it. And the fleet managers that used to want to move from a state, outside state into California, because a lot of different reasons, we're a great state to live in, they have changed their mind about coming into California because they're looking at the regulatory compliance aspect workload, and they've never had to really deal with it that much in a majority of the other states. There's only another few states that have similar regulatory compliance workloads like we do here in California. So that's also limiting the number of choices that we're going to have to hire replacements for all the fleet professionals that are retiring now and will continue to do so over the next 5 years. Any other questions I can answer? Pete, did you have any other questions you can think of?
Not right now. But we'll wait for another 10, 15 seconds. We're almost coming up on 11:30 anyway. But we'll wait, see if anybody else has any other questions. And in the meantime, David, thank you so much. I know how busy you are, how many hours you work, but you're taking your time. You took your time to prepare and put together these slides and work with me and our communications manager, Brian, on putting this together. We really appreciate your time. It's very, very grateful to you, and great presentation. So thank you so much. And thank you for all you people who attended. My contact information was at the beginning slide. We'll be sending out the slides and a recording when we put it up on YouTube to all, not just the attendees, but to all the registrants. So you'll have a recording, link to the recording on YouTube, and then a copy of the slides for everybody who registered. And of course, you can then turn around, provide them to people in your area that might be interested too. So somebody else put a question in the chat quickly, or the Q&A. Oh, you're welcome, Don. Don Weber from Menlo Park. You're most welcome. And I think he's mainly talking to you, David, though.
Don's great. He's doing some great work over there, and known him for a number of years.
Yeah, he's a great guy. So, well, I don't see any other questions. People are starting to leave. Thank you, everybody. Contact David or myself if you need any help. And, I think we'll let it go. What do you think, David?
Sounds good. Again, thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thanks for Pete, Silicon Valley Clean Cities, and Brian for setting this all up. It's important information to get out there. I only touched on a little bit today. Highly recommend you check the links that are in the presentation that'll be shared with you. And I am available if you email me. I will answer your questions as best I can. Just be aware that sometimes it may take me a week or so to get back to you. We're very busy with our own compliance work in this area, and lots of emails coming through and work that we're doing on a daily basis. Again, thank you, everyone, for joining. Appreciate it, and wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.